My name is Leora Vane, and at 42, I glimpse a woman I still know in the cracked mirror of our rented flat in Blackthorn, Cornwall, each dawn. I smooth the collar of my crimson blouse, its silk clinging softly to my frame, while my raven hair tumbles in loose curls I've coaxed with a brush for half an hour. My reflection holds storm-gray eyes, a defiant chin, and a smile I've honed to mask the restless hum beneath my skin. My partner, Torin Vane, 61, has settled into a life that feels like a slow dimming, his once sharp wit dulled by habit, rendering me a shadow in our shared space. He used to pull me into moonlit walks along the cliffs, his voice low with promises that warmed my blood, but now he barely looks up from his crossword puzzles. Every night, Torin slumps into his leather chair, pen scratching or flicking through radio static, while I hover by the window, craving a flicker that never ignites. I dress with care, fitted trousers, silver hoops, a hint of cedarwood scent, because I need to feel vibrant, but Torin's apathy cuts like a blade I can't stop touching. In Blackthorn, a windswept village of stone cottages and jagged shores, others see me. Mrs. Harrow at the bakery lingers over my coat's color with a kind nod that sparks my pulse. Their glances remind me I'm not fading, but at home, I'm a wisp, drifting through a bond too settled to unravel. Yet, there's one gaze that carries weight, stirring both solace and unease. My 19-year-old daughter, Celine Vane, who watches me in a way that twists my heart. Celine has always been my echo, trailing me through Blackthorn's cobbled market since she was small, her fingers tight in mine. Now, at 19, she's willowy, with cropped ash-blonde hair and eyes like chipped slate, piercing through the walls I've raised around my quiet ache. We talk endlessly. Her plans to study folklore, her irritation with her poetry tutor, the boys she shrugs off for not matching her fire. But lately, her focus has shifted, like a wind changing course, and I catch her staring when I stir tea or pin laundry, her eyes tracing my outline too long. Last week, as I knelt in the garden, trowel in hand, she perched on the wall, her voice soft, saying my scarf caught the light like dusk. I smiled, brushing it off, telling myself it's just Celine being thoughtful, but the warmth in her words quickened my breath in a way I pushed aside. She started noticing what Torin overlooks, the copper ring I found at a stall, the way I've been braiding my hair loose. Each word lands like a spark on dry grass, igniting something I try to smother because I'm her mother, not a woman starved for eyes on her. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm weaving shadows into meaning, but deep down, I feel the ground shifting, and I'm not sure I want to halt it. Each night, I lie beside Torin, his steady breaths filling the dark, while I stare at the ceiling, wondering why I feel so alone in a house that holds us both. One morning, as I stood by the kettle, steam curling through the cramped kitchen, the scent of bergamot sharp, Celine drifted in, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She leaned against the doorframe, her half-smile catching me off guard, then said my earrings looked like stars against my hair, bright and bold. I froze, teacup in hand, my cheeks warming because no one's spoken to me like that in years, not even Torin. I muttered something about checking the post, fleeing to the hall, where I pressed my palms against the cold wall, steadying my pulse. Celine's words clung to me all day, looping as I shelved books at the library, their weight both exhilarating and heavy, like a truth I hadn't meant to find. When I returned, Torin was hunched over his radio, lost in a broadcast about smugglers' caves, blind to the new shawl I'd draped with care. I stood in the parlor, waiting for his eyes to lift, to see me, but they didn't, and the quiet between us pressed like stones. Celine, though, saw it all. When I wore coal, when I swapped my boots, when I hummed her favorite tune, and her notice was a warmth I hadn't known I sought in the chill. I began to dread our moments alone, not because I doubted her, but because I wasn't sure I trusted myself to keep the boundaries firm. By bedtime, my thoughts were a knot of shame and want, and I wondered how I'd drifted so far from steady ground. It was a Wednesday, mist cloaking Blackthorn's cliffs, when the tide turned, sharp as a snapped thread. I was in the study, sorting Torin's old maps, rain drumming the panes, when Celine burst in, her coat dripping, her face alight with a mix of mischief and edge. She tossed her bag down, boots scuffing the rug, and declared I wouldn't guess what she'd overheard at the pub during her shift. I set aside a chart, curiosity prickling, and asked what she meant, my voice even despite the flutter I couldn't place. Celine paced, hands dancing, and said she'd been clearing tables when she caught two lads at the bar snickering over a phone. One, a local named Reese, was flashing a photo, and when Celine glanced over, she saw me, clear as day from my blog, a snap I'd posted weeks ago, standing by the harbor in a green coat, gulls overhead, nothing grand. My stomach lurched as she recounted how Reese's mate leaned in, muttering about my look, their tones hushed, like they'd stumbled on a secret. I gripped the desk, breath shallow, and asked if she was certain, half hoping she'd mistaken another for me. Celine stepped closer, eyes sharp, and said she'd know me anywhere it was my photo, captioned Salt and Sky. And she wasn't wrong. The air thickened, the room too tight, and I asked what she'd done, my voice low, unsure I wanted the truth. Celine's grin flashed, fierce and proud, and she said she'd leaned in, voice like ice, asking Reese why he had her mother's picture, shutting the bar's hum to silence. Reese fumbled, red-faced, claiming he'd just found it online, thought I seemed interesting, but Celine didn't budge. I exhaled, hand to my throat, and said she shouldn't have faced them down, that it could have gone sour. She shrugged, chin high, and said she didn't care. She wouldn't let some lads trade my photo like a trophy, whispering things that didn't belong to them. Then, quieter, she admitted she'd swiped Reese's phone to check for more of me, her fingers quick. My jaw dropped, a strange heat mixing with shock, and I chided her, saying she couldn't just take someone's phone, even to shield me. She crossed her arms, unrepentant, and said it was only that one photo, but it fell off, like they'd no right to hold me in their gaze. I rubbed my forehead, grappling with it all, and asked why it hit her so hard, though I feared the depth of her answer. Celine's eyes met mine, steady and raw, and she said I wasn't just anyone to her. I was her mom, and she'd fight to keep my name clear, no matter what. The rain roared, the study too small, and I stood, mumbling about supper to cut the charge between us. In the kitchen, my hands shook as I chopped leeks, unable to shake Celine's fire, her stand for me. It was a care I hadn't felt from Torrin in ages, maybe ever, and it stirred a warmth I didn't want to name. That night, beside Torrin's sleeping form, his back a wall, I replayed Celine's words, her fierce shield, and wondered why it set my pulse racing in ways it shouldn't. I told myself it was pride, that any mother would feel this for a daughter so loyal, but the truth was thorned, and I loathed the mirror it held up. Sleep evaded me, the rain's rhythm a caution, and I knew a line had blurred, one I'd have to redraw. Days later, the weight lingered, like damp in the bones. Celine brought me small gifts, a pressed flower from the moor, a pebble smoothed by the sea, each deliberate, piling like debts I couldn't repay. One evening, as I scrubbed pots, the sink's steam curling, Celine slipped behind me, her arms looping around my waist, a hug too soft, too long. I laughed, stepping forward, and asked what prompted it, my voice light to hide the tremor I felt. She held on a moment more, her breath near my ear, and said she liked catching me off guard, seeing my eyes spark. My chest tightened, sponge dripping, and I turned, searching her face for clarity I wasn't sure I wanted. Her grin flickered, and she announced a plan for tomorrow, something I'd love, but she'd keep it secret, only saying to meet her at dawn. I dried my hands, skeptical, and pressed for clues, half expecting her to dodge with a laugh. She backed away, smirking, and said to trust her. It'd be a moment I'd carry forever. At dawn, I stood in our narrow hall, debating a wool jumper, settling on a violet coat over a scarf, warm but sharp, because part of me wanted to feel seen, even if I wouldn't say why. Celine met me outside, in boots and a faded jacket, her excitement a current as she tugged me to the car, saying we'd be late. We drove past Blackthorn's stone walls, gorse flashing yellow, and I guessed, a coastal hike, the Tirum? She shook her head, grin wide, saying it topped my guesses, her fingers drumming the wheel. When we stopped at a muddy track by the shore, I saw the sign for a dawn boat tour, my breath catching. Years back, I'd told Celine, half dreaming, how I longed to sail at first light, to feel the sea's pulse, but life, rent, work, Torin had buried it. I turned to her, voice soft, and asked if she'd remembered, afraid of what her answer held. She nodded, eyes bright, and said she kept my words close, the ones that mattered, and she'd planned this for me. My throat closed, and I followed her to the dock, where a small boat rocked, its hull chipped blue, waiting like a vow. The guide handed us jackets, muttering about tides, but I barely heard, watching Celine tie my scarf tighter, her knuckles grazing my collar. We boarded, me at the bow, her behind, and as we cut through the mist, the oars felt heavy, but her steady calls kept me sure, her voice a guide. The sea was sharp, spray stinging my face, and I laughed, loud and free, the sound swallowed by the waves as we passed granite cliffs. Celine's laugh wove with mine, bright and wild, and she called me a sailor born, saying we'd outrun the gulls at this rate, pulling a grin for me I'd lost somewhere. For an hour, I wasn't a partner, a mother, a woman bound by days. I was Leora, awake, my pulse alive with a fire I'd forgotten, the horizon endless. Celine let me steer, her hands light on the ropes, and I felt the boat leap, my strength a surprise, a thrill. We slowed, drifting, the boat swaying, and I glanced back, her gaze soft but deep, holding me too long. I said it was magic, my voice unsteady, and asked how I could repay her for this dawn I'd never lose. She shrugged, smile quiet, and said my joy was enough, more than enough, her words sure. I looked to the sea, light breaking the mist, and felt a fracture I couldn't seal. It wasn't just the boat, the dawn, the waves, it was Celine, how she saw me, held me in focus when no one did, not Torin, not the world. We rowed back, the quiet between us warm but charged, and as we stepped ashore, my knees unsteady, her hand steadied my elbow, brief but firm. I thanked her, voice low, and she nodded, saying anytime Leora, anytime, my name Bear, not Mum. We drove back, the road humming, my eyes fixed ahead, afraid of her glance, afraid of what I'd seek. That night, I stood in the bath, combing wet hair, the mirror showing a woman alive, her skin kissed by salt, her eyes too sharp. Torin slept, turned away, and I lingered, watching him, wondering when I'd stopped hoping he'd see me, the woman I hadn't buried. Celine's care filled that gap, her words, her gifts, her fire, and I hated how it lit me, how it made me whole when I'd been half for years. I slid into bed, the dark cold, and lay awake, the day replaying, the sea, Celine's laugh, her touch, and I knew I stood on a cliff's edge. The house slept, and I crept downstairs, needing air, needing calm. In the kitchen, Celine sat, a candle flickering, her eyes lifting as she asked if I was sleepless too. I nodded, arms crossed, and said tea might help, though nothing could hush the storm inside. She poured, her hand steady, like this was our rhythm now. Our fingers brushed as she passed the cup, a spark too quick, and I met her gaze, searching, unsteady. The room glowed faint, moonlight pooling, and the space between us shrank, heavy with something I wouldn't name. I should have left, said goodnight, climbed the stairs, but I stayed because she saw me, and I was weary of being unseen. We stood, silent, the air taut, and I don't know who shifted, her, me. But we were near, her breath close, my pulse a drum I couldn't quiet. It was a second, a held breath, and I stepped back, cup shaking, whispering I needed sleep. Celine nodded, her voice soft, saying goodnight, heavy, like she felt the line we'd grazed, even if we'd done nothing. I climbed to bed, legs weak, and lay beside Torin, his snores a barrier. The ceiling held shadows, and I felt the almost, the might be, if I didn't stop it. Celine saw me, cared, but she was my daughter, and I was her mother, a truth I couldn't bend, no matter the ache for being known. Morning came, and I'd smile, pour tea, act unchanged, but I knew we'd shifted, and I'd have to carry it. Blackthorn's waves roared beyond, and I wondered if I could return to the woman I was before Celine's eyes found me. The next dawn, I woke heavy, Celine's gaze a tide, pulling me. I stood at the stove, eggs sizzling, my hands unsteady, swearing I could keep us as we were, mother and daughter. Torin wandered in, nose in a book, blind to my new skirt, chosen to feel more than the shame clawing me. I offered him tea, voice bright, hoping habit would hold me, but his grunt only deepened the rift. Celine entered, her hair wild, and when she said my skirt suited me, her tone careful, my heart nodded with warmth and fear. I thanked her, turning away, scrubbing plates, willing her not to stay, not to say more. She left, but her glance lingered, a weight I bore through my library shift, smiling at patrons with a mask. That night, on the step, sea salt sharp, Celine joined me, 2 mugs steaming, her nearness both balm and storm. She sat close, saying I deserved light, not a life that dulled me, her words a blade to my core. I stared at the dark, pulse loud, and said she couldn't speak so, that I was her mum, and lines had a hold, no matter my heart. She nodded, quiet, but her fingers grazed mine, too long, and I stood, saying I needed the night, though it already pressed me. Inside, Torin dozed, unaware, and I knew I couldn't stay half-seen, but not with Celine. Never her, no matter how she woke me. Next day, clarity cut through. I signed for a folklore workshop in town, a dream from before Torin, before Celine, to find myself, not in eyes, but my own. Celine saw the shift, and when I shared it, her smile held pride, edged with loss, like she knew I'd stepped back. By the workshop's end, I joined a storytelling circle, evenings by fires, my voice weaving myths, my hands sure, my heart full alone. One night, by the sea, I tossed shells into the foam, each a piece of who I'd been, partner, mother, woman lost, and told the waves I was enough, my words lost to the tide's hymn. The weeks after joining the folklore workshop felt like waking from a long sleep, each day stitching Leora Vane back into herself. Blackthorn's briny air sharpened, gulls keening as if they sensed my shift. I dove into the workshop, nights spent scribbling notes on mermaid lore and cunning foxes, my voice steadying in the storytelling circle, earning nods from strangers who saw me, truly saw me. Yet, Celine's gaze lingered like a tide tugging my resolve, her presence a quiet challenge to the boundaries I'd sworn to keep. Torin sank deeper into his own world at home, his chair a shrine to crosswords and crackling radio dramas, his rare glance at my work. Sounds like fun, Leora, fading without echo. I didn't expect more, but the void of his interest pricked, proof I'd been right to seek my own spark. Celine, though, missed nothing. She'd lean against the counter as I steeped tea, asking about the myths I wove, her curiosity pulling me into talks of sea spirits and star-crossed fates. Her attention warmed me, but it carried a shadow. Each shared smile, each moment her slate eyes held mine, tightened a knot I fought to ignore. One night, as I pored over a tale of a storm-born witch at the dining table, Celine sat opposite, her sketchbook open. The lamp painted her face in gold, her eyes glinting like wet stone. She showed me a drawing, a woman by the cliffs, hair wild, framed by Blackthorn's jagged shore. My breath caught. The figure's stance, her sharp chin, mirrored me too closely. I asked who it was, pulse racing, and she said just a character from my stories, but her voice wavered, and I steered us to safer ground, praising the sketch's lines, afraid to dwell on its truth. Next dawn, I fled to the cliffs alone, sky still dark, the sea's roar drowning my churning thoughts. I stood, coat snapping in the wind, and murmured to the waves that I was trying to be enough, to hold the line, to not let Celine's care twist into something wrong. The ocean stayed silent, but its vastness calmed me, a reminder my heart's storm was small. Back home, Celine was at the stove, flipping scones, her grin bright as she declared a surprise breakfast. Torrin off on errands. I hesitated, her warmth tugging my caution, but sat, letting the meal root us in something simple. Mother, daughter, shared butter and jam. But simplicity frayed. Over scones, she mentioned a lantern festival nearby, all folk tunes and firelight, asking if I'd come, her tone casual but eyes deep. I wanted to agree, to bask in her joy, but the memory of our boat trip, her hand steadying mine, flashed, and I demurred, citing workshop prep, my voice thin. Her smile dimmed, just a flicker, before she nodded and cleared the table. The air grew careful, not cold but strained, and I hated how my guard felt like a blade, even if it kept us safe. The workshop became my haven, each session a chance to slip into stories not my own. I grew bolder, my tales of cunning maids and sea kings earning murmurs, and soon Aloan, a weathered storyteller, asked me to perform at a regional gathering, a stage beyond Blackthorn. I said yes, heart pounding with thrill and dread, knowing this was Leora emerging, not Torrin's shadow, not Celine's anchor, but me, whole. When I told Celine, her face glowed, but a shadow crossed her eyes, and her hug lingered, her arms too warm. I stepped back, smiling to hide the spark her touch ignited, and said I'd meet her there, tethering us to something clear. The gathering came, a starry night, the hall flickering with candles and chatter. I wore my violet coat, hair loose, feeling raw yet alive as I took the stage. Celine sat up front, her gaze a lifeline, and I leaned into it, though its heat stirred unease. My tale, of a woman trading her heart to the sea for freedom, wove through the room, silencing all but the crackle of wax. Applause followed, Celine's hands loudest, her grin wide but eyes heavy, seeing past my words. After, she found me by the cider table, saying I'd been electric, that my voice lit the room. Her praise sank deep, and I thanked her, throat tight, grateful for the crowd's hum around us. But she leaned closer, voice low, saying she'd sketched something from tonight, for me to see later, her tone too intimate. I nodded, muttering about air, and slipped outside, the chill biting as I leaned against the hall's stone, breath ragged. She didn't follow, but her words clung, a pull I couldn't shake. Home. Torrin slept, blind to my night, and I stood in the dark, coat on, grappling with Celine's gifts, her sketches, her care, her fire. They fed a hunger I shouldn't have, a cost I couldn't meet. By morning, I chose distance, not anger but necessity, taking extra workshop hours, library shifts, anything to keep my mind from her eyes. Celine felt it, her questions sharp. Why so busy? Was I upset? And I dodged, saying life was full, my smile brittle. Her hurt showed in glances, but I endured it, knowing space was our salvation. One rainy day, as I sorted books in the library, Celine appeared, drenched, her face taut. She asked why I'd pulled back, voice fierce, like a wound laid bare. My chest ached, and I set my work aside, saying I was finding myself, that the stories were my need now, not her fault. Her eyes searched mine, and I braced for more, but she nodded, lips pressed, and left. Her absence roared louder than the storm, and I hid my face, hating the rift I'd carved. Months passed, the gap a quiet river, guiding us safer. Celine buried herself in sketches, her university plans louder in our talks. I performed more, my stories traveling, each a stone in my new foundation. Torrin stayed Torrin, and I stopped seeking his eyes. One night, Celine gave me a journal, its leather etched with tides for my tales, she said, her voice even, her gaze light. I took it, fingers on the carving, and thanked her, my smile true, relieved. Alone, I wrote a story in its pages, of a woman who found her song in the sea's roar, standing tall without needing eyes to hold her. Blackthorn's waves sang outside, and I knew I'd stepped forward, not back, to a Leora who was enough, her heart hers alone.